Well, sixth grade, I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving break, and we're starting in on Monday. And this is, of course, going to be our remote week for our school. And today we're going to be finishing up chapter 6. Now, it's been a week since we've looked at anything in chapter 6, but just as a quick reminder, chapter 6 is over the American West, and we started off in the beginning of this chapter by looking at the Rocky Mountains. And we know, of course, it's included within the Cordilleran chain, which is the longest mountain chain in North and South America. So we talked about that. We also talked about that included in the Rocky Mountains is Mount Elbert, which is the highest peak in the Rockies. We discussed that. We went on to, of course, talk about the animals of the Rockies, where we have the wild sheep known as the bighorn. And we talked about mountain goats that have hooves like suction cups, and mountain lions that are probably the most carnivorous animal in North America. And of course, the most ferocious and dangerous animal would be the grizzly bear. So we talked about the animals of the Rockies. We also talked about the fauna and the flora. Now remember, the flora, of course, is the plants, and fauna is animals. We discussed those things, and so we discussed a lot, and I would encourage you to go back and look at all of the highlighted information. I think that will help just to jog your memory on what we've discussed prior to going on Thanksgiving break. So I encourage you to do that. Then we went on to look at the Intermountain regions. We talked about the Columbia Plateau, where we discussed the deepest canyon in the United States, which was known as Hell's Canyon. The largest desert is the Great Basin Desert in the United States. We talked about the largest canyon in the world is the Grand Canyon. So, those are things that I want you to really just pay attention to. And of course, those things are bolded as well throughout chapter 16. And then, of course, we finished up on the Thursday prior to Thanksgiving break looking at, of course, it started on page 82 and went all the way to page 85, but that was the Pacific Coast. And, we learned a lot of fascinating things about the Pacific Coast. We know that it is the home of the tallest trees in North America. And remember, we went and looked at some beautiful pictures of places and animals here in the Pacific Coast. We looked at gray whales and the albatross and, of course, salmon. We discussed, the Pacific Mountains, which we know the Crater Lake is the deepest lake in the United States. Mount Whitney is going to be the highest peak in the United States, south of Alaska. So that's important to remember. And of course, General Sherman was the world's largest tree, and that, of course, is in the Sequoia National Park. So those are things that we've discussed already and that you should have highlighted in your book. Now, what's important about this is that on Friday you're going to have a quiz that's going to cover 6.5 and 6.6. And if you just review this information starting today and go over, of course, what we're going to read here in just a few minutes, that's going to help you prepare for your quiz on Friday. So those are things that are coming up. Now, you will not have a test over Chapter 6 until a week from tomorrow. So you have a little bit of time, and I didn't want to test you through our remote week, so we'll have this test on Tuesday. Now, I did give you your study guide, so those are things you can go ahead and start working on now and start preparing for your test a week from tomorrow. And on the very end of your study guide, you will see where it'll say, review these locations. Well, I'm not going to have any maps on this upcoming test for the reason that we haven't been face-to-face in class. So therefore, you can mark that part off at the very end of the back page of your study guide. There will not be any maps on the upcoming test, but you will be responsible for everything else on your study guide. So just be reviewing that. But today we're going to start on the Indians of the West. And, I think just learning and studying about the culture of Indians is fascinating. And we've already talked about the Indians of the East. We talked a lot of different tribes like the Cheyenne and the Shawnee, and we talked about the Iroquois Nation. So we talked about a lot of the Indian tribes on the East. But today we're going to be looking at the Indian tribes of the West. And that's where you're going to begin our reading today. So turn to page 86 in your book, and you will see at the very top of the page it says Indians of the West. And it says this: "You have seen that the western third of North America is a land of great variety. Its mountains, valleys, plateaus, deserts, forests, seashores, rivers, and lakes supported many different kinds of American Indian tribes. The main Indian culture area of the West are the Northwest Coast, the California Intermountain region, and the Southwest." Now they're going to start by going over information of the Northwest Coast. So it starts out by saying the Northwest Central region is one of the richest parts of North America in natural resources. Salmon, trout, whales, seals, and shellfish were some of the richest, or of the richest that the Northwest Indians harvested from the sea. They also hunted such inland mammals as deer, elk, bear, caribou, and otters for their skins and meat. The many different trees and other plants yielded a wealth of nuts and berries to supplement their diets. During the spring and summer, the Northwest tribes could easily find enough food to last through the winter. And they, of course, used everything that they hunted for. Animal wise, they used everything from the skin to the meat to the internal organs. Everything was used by the Indians. They did not believe in wasting anything that they hunted for. So that's important to just always remember. Now, there were several tribes here of the Northwest Coast. So some of the tribes included the Tlingit, the Nootka, the Chinook, and the Bellicula. And although there were several different tribes, they all had similar customs. Now, some of the customs that they had, if you look under culture and custom, it says the Northwest Indians were one of the most advanced Indian cultures of North America, especially after the white men arrived. They did not have farms, but they made good use of many trees of their region. They made canoes, sometimes 60 feet long, beautiful boxes, wooden houses, and ornately carved totem poles. Now, please mark this in your book. It says on their houses and totem poles, they would carve their family crest or seal. Many relatives would share a house. The tribes of the Northwest Coast spent their summers gathering food, and the long winter months they spent weaving, carving, and painting. They also held religious and secret society meetings, many of which were very cruel. Sometimes at a gathering called a potlatch, a rich man would kill his most valuable slave just to prove he was rich. He would then throw the slave's scalp at his rival. After the white men came, trading and trapping became very important to the Northwest Indians. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the California Intermountain region. And of course, you're going to see the types of animals that they hunted for in this region: the red squirrels, mule deer, mountain lions, mountain goats, bighorn sheep, grizzly bears. We've already talked a lot about these types of animals. But the tribes who lived amongst this region, the first one mentioned was the Shoshone tribe. Now, these Indians were named for their curly hair, so that's how they got their name, Shoshone. These people lived in the dry and barren area that is now Nevada, Utah, and Idaho. They ate mostly seeds, roots, fish, birds, and small animals such as rabbits. When food was plentiful and the winter mild, they would live together in villages. But they usually traveled in small family groups of 8 to 10 people searching for food. Many times, when the winter was harsh or the food was scarce, they would leave their sick or elderly or newborns out to die. I know that's very sad to talk about, but they would do that. I assume they felt out of necessity. It was their custom to name the different family groups after the food they ate. Thus, some winters were called rabbit eaters, others were known as seed eaters, and so forth. Every year, each family group would return to the same areas to hunt or gather food. Today, many Shoshone Indians live in Wyoming, Idaho, and Nevada, and they often earn their living as farmers or ranchers. Now, Sacagawea, as you probably have heard her name before, she was a Shoshone. She was, of course, the daughter of the chief of the Shoshones, and she was also known as Bird Woman. So Sacagawea was also known as Bird Woman. Now, please mark that in your book. Now, when she was 12 years old, she was captured by enemy Indians and later sold to a French-Canadian trapper who married her. Sacagawea, her husband, and their infant son joined the Lewis and Clark expedition. So make sure that you know that about Sacagawea. Now, Lewis and Clark, they were two famous explorers that was traveling from St. Louis, Missouri, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and they were supposed to document their travels. And Sacagawea led their way, and was often beneficial in helping them to go through areas of other Indian tribes by helping them with the language barrier there in some of those tribes. Now, Sacagawea acted as the guide for the group. When the expedition ran into a group of Shoshone Indians led by Sacagawea's brother, Lewis and Clark were pleasantly surprised. Because Sacagawea was with the group, the Shoshones treated the explorers kindly. So again, a wonderful thing to read in history about this Shoshone woman by the name of Sacagawea. Now we're going to go on from the Shoshone tribe to the Nez Perce tribe, okay? And the Nez Perce were named by a French interpreter. Their name means to pierce nose, although they rarely pierce their nose, but that's what their name was known as. The Nez Perce lived in Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. They ate berries and roots, and they fished the rivers for salmon. When the horse was introduced to these people, now remember, horses were not native to the United States. They were brought over by the Spanish. But when the Indian tribes were introduced to the horse, it changed their lives. They began to hunt buffalo. They used the skins for the clothes and lived in skin-covered teepees. They became well known for their horsemanship and soon became famous at breeders of the Appaloosa, a horse with a spotted or splotched coat. So the Appaloosa horse they became famous for. Now, the Nez Perce was also very friendly to explorers, and they were proud, handsome, kind-hearted people. Many white settlers would have died if the Nez Perce had not helped them. For over 70 years, they tried to live in peace with the settlers. Now, eventually, the Nez Perce was moved to a reservation in Oklahoma. And you need to know the definition of a reservation. A reservation is a piece of land set aside by the government as a home for the Indian tribe. So they moved to a reservation in the state of Washington. Now, their famous leader was Chief Joseph. So make sure that you know that about the Nez Perce Indians, that their famous leader was Chief Joseph. Okay? Now, one of the saddest stories in history, and I've read this many, many times over the years, but one of the saddest stories deals with the story of Indians traveling to the Northeast, to St. Louis, Missouri, looking for the book from heaven. And of course, we know that they were actually looking for the Bible. And so it says here, and I'm going to just go ahead and read through this because I think it's an amazing story. I want it to be a story that you remember forever, because it just goes to prove how people, that God places into people's heart the need for His Word. And that's exactly what happened here. So there's an old story that talks about 4 Indians from the tribes of the Northwest journey. Now, many say that these Indians came from the Nez Perce tribe. But I know they were from the Northwest Territory. They journeyed from over 3,000 miles from their home to St. Louis, Missouri in the autumn of 1832. Their story was that a white man had witnessed to their tribes about a book from heaven, and therefore the chief sent 4 of these men in search of this book. They were looking for the Bible. The Indians came to see the superintendent of Indian affairs, William Clark. Now, William Clark was the same man who had journeyed from St. Louis all the way to the Pacific coast. So, of course, years later, these 4 Indians come to Clark, and Clark met with them and showed them many things there in St. Louis. He would take them to the tall buildings and show them the architecture of St. Louis and show them the wealth of the city. But he did not give the Indians what they had come for, a Bible in their own language and a preacher to take back to their people. Clark tried to impress them with the things of this world, the riches of this world, but that's not what they were looking for. When the time came for the Indians to return home, one of the Indians said, "My people sent me to get the white man's book from heaven. I'm going back the long trail to my people in the dark land. You make my feet heavy with gifts, and yet the book is not among them. My people will die in darkness, and they will go a long path to other hunting grounds. No white man will go with them, and no white man's book to make the way plain." So you see, it wasn't the riches that these Indians were searching for. It wasn't food. It wasn't anything that they could go back to their people with. What they were searching for was God's Word, and they knew without it that their people would die in darkness. Now, the word got out, and by 1836, 2 couples the Whitmans and the Spaldings, they heard of the plight of the Nez Perce Indians and the Indians there in the Northwest. And they heard the story about how these Indians went back without that book from heaven. And so we see this inspired this couple to travel out west to the Nez Perce tribe and to the other Indian tribes there in the Northwest. Now the story continues to say in 1836, the American Board of Foreign Missions had decided to sponsor Dr. Marcus Whitman and Reverend Henry Spalding to work among the Indians of the Northwest. Their wives, Narcissa Whitman and Eliza Spalding, became the first white women to journey west of the Rockies. The women established a mission among the Cayuse Indians in the present state of Washington, and the Spaldings settled in the present state of Idaho and ministered into the Nez Perce. The Whitmans provided a good example of Christian living and a strong witness for Christ, and they led many Indians to the Lord. But in 1847, a measles epidemic struck their settlement. Because the Indians lacked a natural immunity to the measles disease, many of the Indians fell sick and they died. Although the Whitmans exhausted themselves trying to help, many Indian children perished. The chief of the Cayuse had lost 2 children to this epidemic and felt that Dr. Whitman was allowing these Indians to die. On November 29, 1847, as Dr. Whitman sat in his home after returning from doctoring the sick, an Indian brave took a tomahawk and killed him. Indians also killed Mrs. Whitman as she tried to comfort her family. So they blamed the Whitmans for the measles epidemic and, of course, took their lives during that time. Now, not all of the Indians were angry with the Whitmans. Many had become Christians. 3 of the Whitman Indians risked their lives to rescue other settlers from the angered Indians and later helped bury the dead at the mission. As news of the Whitman massacre spread, the Nez Perce protected the Spaldings from being attacked and killed by those angry Indians. So again, just a very sad story that took place, but we see the Word of God continued there, and many of the Indians found Christ because of the examples of the Whitmans and the Spaldings. All right, we're going to go on down, and we're going to continue talking about, of course, the Indians here of the Northwest Coast, especially the Nez Perce. Now, here on page 88, so if you turn there, it talks about a different Indian tribe by the name of the Salish Indians, or part of the group of tribes known as Flatheads. Now, these Indians lived in northwest Montana, and they were similar to the Plain Indians. After the Salish acquired horses, they would go to the Great Plains each year to hunt buffalo. The Salish often battled with the Indians of the Plains. Most Salish lived in teepees, but some lived in mat-covered A-frame lodges. Fish was, of course, important to their diet, and they used either bark or skin canoes to travel the waters. Now, by 1872, most of the Indian tribes had settled on Flathead reservations in one of the most beautiful areas of western Montana. Okay, so that was the Salish Indians. Then you have the Cayuse Indians. They lived in what's now in northeast Oregon. Okay, so just know that their culture was greatly influenced by the Plain Indians, and they also bred horses and dealt with horses. They said a kind of pony that cowboys often used was named the Cayuse after this tribe. Then you have the Ute Indians. So please mark this in your book. Now, I don't have it marked on screen, but I want you to mark it. The Ute Indians was named after, the Ute Indian name went on to provide the name for the state of Utah. So make sure that you know that. These people lived in small family groups and roamed the area of Utah and Colorado. Ute Indians were on reservations in southwestern Colorado or Utah. And again, just a quick reminder, a reservation was the land the government set aside for Indian tribes. Okay? Then you're going to go on and talk about the Southwest Indians. Now, this is, of course, the Indian tribes that lived in present-day Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, and, of course, even northern Mexico. Okay? So now you see the Pueblos. The Pueblos were southwestern Indians, and they were the descendants of the early civilization called Anasazi, who were excellent basket weavers. Okay, And so make sure that you just go through, know that the early Pueblo people cut their multi-room houses into solid rock, and some were tall with many rooms like an apartment building. So you can see an example of this here at the bottom of the screen. Okay. Then you're going to go on and talk about the Pueblo Indians, known as the Hopi Indians, or the peaceful Indians. Then you have the Zuni Indians, known as unknown Indians, and the Keras, drinkers of the dew, and the Tiwas. These were moccasin Indians. So these all are referred to as the Pueblo Indians, are the Hopi. Okay, Hopi. So make sure you know that. And the Pueblos were very peaceful and friendly, and most of them did farm. So you can go through and read that as well. And again, they believed in no waste, so that's important to keep in mind. All right, we're going to quickly finish up the chapter here, going on to talk about the Mojave Indians of the Northwest Arizona were primarily farmers, so make sure that you know that. Then you have the Navajo. Now the Navajo, again, you can see it's spelled with the J, but it's pronounced with the H, and so it's sometimes called, spelled with an H. But the Navajo tribe, make sure you mark this in your book, is the second largest Indian tribe in the United States today. Okay, and they lived, of course, in the areas of Arizona and New Mexico, and they were known for their famous beautiful woven rugs and their silver jewelry. Okay, and they say this that there's tens of thousands of Navajo that live on a reservation in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, about 25,000 square miles, about the size of, you got it, our great state of West Virginia. Okay, then you have the Apache Indians. Now the Apache Indians lived in teepees, or what was called wickiups, wood frame huts covered with grass or brush, and they wore animal skins for clothing. Now, throughout history, you'll hear the term Apache quite a bit, and usually when you hear the term Apache, it's usually where the Apaches were unsettled with white men coming into the territory and often attacked those white settlers. A man by the name of Geronimo. Geronimo was an Apache leader that led his people in resisting the southwestern settlements of the Spaniards and the Americans, and he was well known and feared for his hit-and-run raids, and that's why the Apache name has been known throughout history as a feared Indian tribe, due to Geronimo being a leader of Apaches that would go in and have these hit-and-run raids on settlements. On September 3rd, 1886, Geronimo surrendered and was then placed in exile at Fort Pickens in Pensacola, Florida, with other members of his tribe. After being transferred to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, he accepted Christ and joined the Dutch Reformed Church. Okay. All right, that finishes up our chapter. And so what I would need for you to do is go ahead and complete the comprehensive check 6F 1 through 4. Now, at this point, you should have 6A, B, C, D, E, and F. So I need you to make sure that you have that. Make sure you keep your paperwork, and you need to bring that into school to me next Monday. And of course, at that point, I will grade it for a homework grade. So please make sure that you have that ready for me next Monday. That's going to be important to you.